Ladies and gentlemen, we welcome you to episode number 36 of the Primetime Rundown interview series powered by Streamyard. I'm Joey Jarzynka. We cannot thank you enough for joining us here on this Wednesday evening. We are joined by the second female on this interview series. This is now 34 of 36 episodes have been with only males, but now we would like to add Kristen Shilton to the female side of things here. So, Kristen, you are a TSN beat reporter for the Toronto Maple Leafs. How are you, and how are things in Canada and in quarantine?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me on today. Things have been okay. We're muddling along. We've got a little spike in cases here in the Ontario province, in Toronto especially, but we're getting through it. We're all trying to do our best, as I'm sure you can attest to where you are. So just hoping that once this cup final wraps up, that we can actually start getting in some hockey news with the draft and free agency and all that other fun stuff.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it, and especially out here on Long Island, things have been have been getting a little bit better, but we have seen some cases pop up here and there. So glad to hear that you are doing well up there. So for those who have or who are just tuning in for the first time, this interview series powered by StreamYard is to figure out who these people are, and the best part about it is that we want to know who Kristen Shilton is beyond just the LinkedIn page or the Twitter feed or the Instagram feed. We know you're a fitness guru. We know you are a TSN beat reporter for the Toronto Maple Leafs, but we want to know how you got to where you got to. So let's get things started. 2007 to 2010, you graduated from a small college called Wilfrid Laurier University and received your bachelor's in bachelor's in arts in English in Waterloo, Ontario. Talk about that and how you eventually got to really to Syracuse, where you crossed the border and kept going to school down here.
Yeah, when I graduated from high school, I really thought I was going to go into either maybe teaching English or writing fiction or being a book editor, something like that. So that was really my goal coming out of high school at 17. And I actually went to the University of Toronto for a year. Didn't like that experience at all. I transferred to Laurier, which is actually my hometown. In Kitchener-Waterloo, and that was a huge thing for me to get to go home, much more comfortable and learning environment for me. And I continued on studying English, thinking that I would eventually be a creative writer or an author of some kind, something bookish, basically. But that didn't really tell the whole story of what was in my heart. And that was that I loved journalism. I loved sports. I really thought that in another life, I could have made a career as a sports journalist. But there's not a lot of women who do that, especially back then. I mean, 10 years ago, I just didn't see women doing that. So I didn't think of it as something worth pursuing at that point in my life. And after I graduated from Laurier, I got a job as a copywriter in Toronto, and I moved to the big city, and I was in an office every day with creative people. I was using the degree that I had earned, but there was just, my heart wasn't in it. There was no passion for me. I spent a lot more time on my computer reading sports blogs, listening to podcasts, watching videos, and working on my own blog posts for various blog networks than I ever did actually focusing on the job that I had been hired for. So eventually, after about 2 months of this, I just thought, you know what, it's not worth it to be 21 years old and not pursuing what really makes you happy. Maybe you fail, maybe you don't get where you want to go, but you got to try. You have to make the effort. So I quit my job that same day. I gave my 2 weeks notice. I applied to a college in Belleville called Loyalist. I went there. They were still accepting applications for the fall. So basically I graduated from Laurier in April 2010. And then in September 2010, I started in the sports journalism program at Loyalist. That was a 1-year program. Basically just got an overview of journalism because I hadn't done it yet. I was taking radio classes, TV classes, writing, research, all of that. And during that year, I applied to Syracuse, and Syracuse accepted me. And that's when that following, once I graduated from Loyalist, 2 weeks later, basically, I moved to upstate New York, and from there, everything just continued to grow.
Yeah, and the best part about it, obviously, is that once you get to to the Mount Rushmore of these universities, especially here in the United States, obviously the Syracuses, Northwesterns, the Fordhams of the world, and to be able to get accepted from one of the aforementioned three in Syracuse University and getting your master's in magazine, newspaper, and online journalism, and your emphasis was in sports communication. Kristen, it seems to me, just by looking at not only at your LinkedIn, but you are just a go-getter. You keep on going, and there's the amount of jobs that you've had here is, for some people, is a lifelong resume, but for you, your life is just beginning here, and we're filling up a whole Word document, 8.5 by 11 here, of just real life experience, and it ranges from exactly what you said, a junior copywriter, all the way down to a staff writer for 20 What, where you were the Women's Lifestyle magazine staff writer and editor. So talk about that, where you actually took a little bit of a detour out of the sports area, and then you were in the women's lifestyle area. How did that all fit in?
Well, I think it's important to take advantage of opportunities that challenge you, that are outside your comfort zone, that really force you to kind of look at your own skill set in a different capacity, because it's very easy, I think, to get tunnel vision and say, I know that this is what I'm really good at, so I'm just going to keep doing that as much as possible. Well, I mean, that's like anything. It's like when you work out, if you do the same workout every single day, eventually your body is going to be like, no, we're not doing, like, we're used to this. We're not going to change, and we're not going to get stronger anymore because we've adapted. And it's the same thing to me in your career. I mean, I knew I wanted to pursue a career in sports, but instead of immediately going out to an internship, I took this opportunity that was presented to me at Syracuse to work on 20 What and to be writing articles about fashion and lifestyle, which are two things that, I mean, sure, I enjoy a nice, curated Instagram feed about those things, but I certainly didn't know enough, I thought, to be writing about it. But, the editors had confidence that I could contribute in that capacity outside of sports. And I learned so much about my own skills, about, how to write for different audiences, working with editors who see things differently, because obviously their expertise is not in sports, but in, in fashion and in just an avenue that I knew that I would never pursue as a career, but that was really good for me as a journalist, as a writer, as a interviewer, to go into that place that made me very uncomfortable and where I was not used to being. And I felt like that was a better opportunity than just going right into sports and right into something I was familiar with. And then even from there, when I made the jump after 20 What to USA Football, it was in a media relations capacity. And that was by design as well, because writing press releases is very different than writing, an article. So I again had a chance to sort of update my knowledge, update my ability and skill set, so that you take those pieces from everywhere you can find them, and then you channel that into what really you're passionate about, which for me was sports journalism. So I tell everyone this, it's my number one piece of advice for anyone pursuing anything in media. It's don't limit yourself to just the jobs or the opportunities that cater to exactly what you want to do, because you'll be so one-dimensional. You've got to get more out of the experiences than just what you already know. Go do something that you think has nothing to do with the ultimate goal of yours, and you'll find that the skills you get are going to be so transferable, and they're just going to make you better at the job you really want to be doing.
Right. Yeah. And you know what? We've heard from numerous interviewees, some colleagues of yours, especially in the Major League Baseball field, one of which being Anthony DiComo, who is a writer for the New York Mets. I remember he did say the words, get out of your comfort zone and write sports that you have no idea about. And I remember when he said that when he was at Boston College, he wrote for lacrosse, and that is obviously a sport that some do not really know about. And for just to, again, for you with USA Football and being a communications intern and then eventually getting back into hockey, and, with you being from Canada, hockey is obviously what everyone watches and plays up in your neck of the woods. And right after your internship with USA Football, you eventually became the communications assistant and then digital media coordinator for the Chicago Wolves AHL affiliate. So really, really good stuff. And I guess that would be in, or how would you describe it? Would be to, I guess, complete the sports circle, if you will, in terms of knowledge?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned lacrosse. I covered lacrosse at Syracuse as well for the in-house news network. And let me tell you, lacrosse it's if you don't know that sport, it's tough. It's not an easy gig.
Yeah,
to cover a sport that you really don't know anything about. But again, that's how you learn. That's how you grow. So those opportunities were invaluable. And yeah, definitely going into and the thing I'll say about going to USA Football is that I had to move to Indianapolis to take that internship. And I didn't know anybody in Indianapolis. I'd never been there. I'd never really been to the Midwest. I didn't really know what I was getting into. I just knew that this was something that was going to be a stepping stone for me. And it was something that scared me. It was something that, you put yourself in these situations. Yes, professionally, you're going to challenge yourself, but that challenged me as a person, just having to move somewhere that I knew absolutely no one. I didn't know what it was like. I had no idea what to expect. So moving there and being so involved with football, especially being on these conference calls with NFL players who worked with USA Football for their charities, for example, or worked with them with the Pop Warner leagues. We were on calls with like Peyton Manning and guys like that who would be involved with projects that we were working on. So I loved blogging about football before. I had been doing that for a couple of years before I got to USA Football, just with a great women's blogging network, basically. And I just did that for fun. So I actually kind of thought at that point that maybe my best chance of really staying in the US, first of all, as a reporter, and of making sort of inroads was to stay in football. And so I sort of had that on my mind, like I might be a football reporter instead of a hockey reporter. Because at the time I really was anxious to stay in the US, and I thought that was such a popular sport that would be the right call. But then, that was when the Chicago Wolves job became available, and it was such a perfect sort of storm of, I had a friend who was working for the Wolves at the time, and he let me know about the position. And as soon as I spoke with the media relations director who would become my boss, I mean, it just seemed too perfect. And the thing about that, though, when you talk about taking chances, I was not actually the Wolves' first choice for that job. They actually offered it to someone else ahead of me, the communication. And I was devastated. I was so upset. And that's how I knew my heart was really in hockey and not in covering football, because I was so sad to have missed out on that chance. And then 2 days later, they called me back and said, hey, this guy passed on the job, and so we'd like to offer it to you. And I was like, yes, absolutely, 100%, thank you. And that's, I didn't take that personally. I thought, hey, you know what? You don't ever turn down an opportunity to do something you love. So going back into hockey felt so natural. I had covered it last for the Syracuse Post. When I was in Syracuse, I covered a lot of American Hockey League, college hockey, high school hockey for them while I was in Syracuse. So it felt like a natural progression to go back to hockey. And once I was at the Wolves, the communications assistant role only went for so long, and I loved it there so much. I loved the company. that Don Levin had built there, and the people that I actually pitched them on the digital coordinator job, which didn't exist. And I pitched the vice president of the team on it and said, this is why you need to keep me. This is what I'm going to do for you. And he was like, she was like, yeah, okay, then you can stay and you can do this. And that job ended up being the springboard to everything else that came after in my career.
It's amazing, and it also just shows again the progression. You know, and I hate to keep bringing it up, but you know, every single person that we've had on have had on here. It's all about the people that you know, and it's the windy roads that eventually get you to the spot that you never thought you would get to, and clearly for you. You know, to get back home, you actually had to go almost 3,000 miles west to the City of Angels, because right after your time in Chicago, you know, you just said you never had been to the Midwest before with Indianapolis. Then you had gone even further west, and then then you really went west, and then there was no coming back from that. So from January 2014 to June of 2016, you were, and as we heard you utter before, USA Today digital producer in Los Angeles, and tell us about what you did there, because again, you're out in Los Angeles, in the media capital of the world. You know, it's an amazing place to be. The weather's beautiful. Not right now, obviously, with the fires. But everything must have been going phenomenally for you, where you're out in LA.
Yeah, LA, I look back on it now and I think I can't believe I was ever that impulsive, that I really thought I'm just going to pick up and move to LA. Doesn't every, you know, small town girl from Ontario eventually do that once in her life? I thought that I was so fearless at that point in my life. I had nothing to lose. I had no roots anywhere. Really, I just wanted my dream job. I wanted to be an NHL beat reporter. That was what I craved. And that job I had to be a little bit more creative than some, as I kind of said about sort of pitching jobs and things like that, because of my status as a Canadian. Obviously, I didn't have the same chance to just get whatever job I wanted. If I had been American, there was a lot of hoops you had to jump through from a legal standpoint in terms of getting work visas and things like that. So I couldn't. It took a certain company that would be willing to go through that process with me in order for those things to happen. So when the USA Today job came up on my radar, and they had reached out to me about essentially it was like a web editing sort of job, where they saw what I did for the Wolves in my time, sort of revamping their social media, revamping the website, and how they communicated digitally, and they thought I could translate some of that to you know, what they were doing at the time. And so it wasn't that they were offering me an NHL writing job. They were basically saying, we want you to be on our sports team, and you'll be working on the web side of it. You'll be editing, you'll be working, moving things around on the website. And so it was different, but that was a way to secure a work visa for me, because, that job falls under a certain category at the time, as a graphic designer, essentially. So I took a risk in that they told me, this is what your job will be, but there will be plenty of opportunity if you choose to take it, also to cover sports as well and to write your own stuff. And I thought, okay, well, I have to do this. I have to take the chance, because I will always regret it if I don't. There was no guarantee of how many articles a week or how much I would get to write, but I had to do it. And then they dropped in, oh yeah, the job's in LA. And I thought, well, that's wonderful. Let's move to LA. Let's go. Let's pack up. I had a little two-door Fiat at the time. I drove my little Fiat full to the brim across the country, and moved to LA, and it was terrifying and exhilarating and wonderful, and it was hot. And for the Canadian gal, it was really, the first little bit, I was like, well, you just OD on sunshine out here. It's always sunny. It never is cloudy. So when I got there, right away, I spoke. Actually, before I moved, I should point out, I went to DC, where the USA Today's main offices, and I met with the NHL editor there, and he was like, absolutely, as much as we can get you doing on top of your 40 hours a week of your actual job, I'll have you doing whatever you want. You can pretty much write your own ticket in terms of, if you're pitching stories, or if you want to, go to games or practices or whatever it is. So when I got to LA, I worked harder than I even thought that I could work, in that I did my shifts of running the website essentially, and editing stories and working on that side of it. And then when I wasn't doing that, I was going to morning skates, I was going to practices, I was driving down the I-10 to Anaheim to go to their games or go to their practices, write stories, just doing as much as I possibly could on the NHL side, and then doing the other, the web stuff to keep my employment status essentially. So it was, you're not compensated though for that extra time. You're doing it because you love it. You're doing it because it's what, I shouldn't say you're not compensated. It's all part of what you're doing for the company, obviously. But that was it was these extra opportunities to just cover as much hockey as I possibly could. And it was the best part to me. It was what I loved, and I didn't even have to be there, at the games and stuff. I could write back at the office, and the environment there was just not a lot of, competition at USA Today out west for bylines in hockey, because we didn't really have a hockey reporter out there. So I wanted that to be me, and I did what I had to do to make that happen. And writing constantly and going to as many of those games and practices and skates as I could, building connections and just building my Rolodex of players, and whether it's an assistant GM, it's another reporter, it's a broadcaster, introducing myself to everyone, making sure everyone knew who I was when I was at the rink. And that's a scary thing, I think, for a lot of people, to put themselves out there, but it's the only way. And I was able to really make some inroads in LA over the about 18 months I lived out there. But the sad part of it is I just couldn't maintain out there by myself. I didn't have a support system. I didn't have friends and family, other than friends that I had made kind of in passing, because I worked so much. I didn't really have a lot of time for socializing. And it just got to a point where I was so sad personally, and I felt so disconnected from my life out there in LA by myself, kind of like I was on an island. And so eventually I had to say to my boss, hey, I love my job, but can I do this job from Chicago instead? Can I go back to Chicago, where I had great friends, I was close to my family? And so after about 18 months, I had to make that call for my mental health and say, I can't do both. I can't be great at my job at the expense of my mental health. And this is not good for me. This environment out here, just the lifestyle was not for me. And so they very graciously did allow me to move back to Chicago and to continue on there. And I just covered the Blues and the Blackhawks instead of the Kings and the Ducks. So a great time in my life, a great chapter out in LA. I had the first story I've ever written that ended up on the front page of a national newspaper, which was really cool. But in the end, it's important, I think, especially for young people, to understand your job is also not the only thing that matters. And that if you need to make a change for your own well-being, don't be afraid to do that either, because people who value you, companies that value you, they're definitely going to be willing to help you be in a position to succeed in all aspects of your life.
Yeah, a touching answer, to be completely honest there, because exactly what you said. Not only is Los Angeles completely different, and the amount of times that I've been out there, I've had, especially going from LA to Anaheim, it could be potentially like a 3-hour drive just going.
Yeah.
So, it takes a toll on you when you're sitting in traffic for 3 hours, only going about 15, 20 miles. So it really does take a toll on you down that freeway. But you were speaking about not having the support system out west. So being able to head back east for you, obviously we'll get to where you are now in just a moment, but being able to cover the Kings, the Ducks, and then eventually being able to cover the Blues and the Blackhawks, how you got up out of bed every single day and you said, I'm extremely blessed to be able to do this. Is that right, or am I a little far off? Because there are some people out there that hate their job, hate what they do, but then there's also some people clearly like you where you've done so much, especially throughout college, where actually that'll be my next question. But, again, do you wake up every single day and say to yourself, those sacrifices that I made eventually, paid off for you, and I'm extremely blessed that I did that?
Yeah, I can't. It's funny. I always say that I haven't worked yet. I'm still waiting for my first work day. I'm waiting for the first day that what I do feels like something that I can't wait for it to be done. And if this pause that the world has been on these last 6 months have taught me anything even more so, is that every single day now I wake up and I just wish for a work day. I wish for the stress and the craziness and the intensity. I just keep checking my phone or checking in with sources, just hoping for a trade, hoping for something, because this is what I'm passionate about. It's what I would do for free if I didn't need the money. And what that comes from is it comes from so many different aspects, but I always thought of myself as a storyteller. That when I was even back in undergrad thinking that I was going to be an author or a creative writer, it stemmed from the fact that I wanted to tell stories. I wanted to communicate the best way that I knew how, which was through the written word. And that was something that even when I was a kid that I loved, and it always made me feel good, and it made me feel proud of myself, because I felt like I think everyone gets, their little bit of magic, their little bit of spark, and their little thing they get to contribute to the world. And if I can tell stories, if that's what I get to do every day of my life, then that's the most perfect life that I could imagine. So I do genuinely feel that just that sense of purpose, that sense of gratitude. And I love the phrase, like when you say you're so lucky to do something, I always thought the harder I worked, the luckier I got. And I do feel extremely lucky to be in the position that I am. But at the same time, there was so many days where I was so tired, or I was so, I have student debt just like everybody, and you're so demoralized by, you feel like you're working so hard, and yet you don't even get to keep a lot of the money that you're making early on, because you're just trying to stay on top of your loans, and you're trying to keep food in the fridge, and you're trying not to eat mac and cheese every night, and you're trying to have a life, and there's so many times where I thought, is it worth it? Yeah. But it wasn't that I thought, oh, is it worth it to continue pursuing this? It's just, is it worth, sort of like I was talking about with my mental health, like you have to find the balance too. You have to find how to not let the job consume you, because the people that I went to school with that started out in media and loved it, I think as much as I did, they kind of burned out a little, because they went so hard for it, and then they just kind of felt like they weren't getting enough back. And I always tried to frame it as my bad days are still exponentially better than some people's good days, because I love so much what I get to do. So it has been a crazy journey. I'll always remember the cab driver who was picking me up at 5:00 in the morning in Chicago, and I was flying that morning to St. Louis to cover the Blues Sharks game that was happening that night. I think it was the Western Conference Final a few years back. And, I was so tired. I had worked till 1 a.m. the night before, and I was up again, and, to fly. And I was telling the cab driver this, and he's like, yeah, but you know what? I could be taking you to dig ditches right now, but instead I'm taking you to the airport, and you're going to cover an NHL hockey game. So it's not so bad. And I was like, yeah, you know what? There's no such thing as a bad day really in what I do.
It's the truth. It really is the truth, especially if you get to where you want to get to. And the best part about it is that we were just talking about the support system slowly finding its way back closer to home, and you had found it back in Chicago, and now eventually you're back home in the province of Ontario as a Toronto Maple Leafs beat reporter. So give us a little bit of background about how you got back into your native Canada, and to be able. And now I got to ask you this actually off the cuff: did you root for the Toronto Maple Leafs when you were a child?
Oh yes, I was most certainly growing up in this area. I was most certainly a Leaf supporter, a Leaf fan. Many nights spent watching the Maple Leafs.
I love it. That's great. So yeah, so give us a little bit of background about how you got there, and talk about your time covering the Leafs on radio, online, and again, we've even in my trips to Toronto visiting cousins, I've seen you on television. So let's hear how you got there.
Yeah, well, it's a funny thing because just even saying about the fandom, I lost so much of that fan mentality when I sort of went into the business side of sports. In that, when I started out, whether it was covering whatever hockey team it was, is once you get into it on that side of it, it's the cliche amongst reporters is that you then stop rooting for a team, you start rooting for players, because again, you're telling their stories. And so there's certain guys where, like, Michael Hutchinson was a great example for me, where he had a rough go of it with the Leafs, and then goes on to Colorado and he gets a great chance. And that's a guy you root for. You always will. But I will just sort of, even going back to my last answer, I almost miss the ability to be a fan and to watch hockey in a way where I'm not always looking at it from the sort of the beat reporter perspective, because that's how I always watch it now. And getting back to Toronto was something that I always hoped that I would get to do. It was my dream growing up, obviously, to cover the Leafs, because it wasn't like it is now where you have, 17 channels of hockey games. You saw the Leafs because they were in your region. And there was no women, obviously, on TV talking about the Leafs, or there weren't female play-by-play. Announcers, or still barely are, all these years later. But that was a big dream of mine, but it's also a big reason why I didn't pursue journalism right away, because I didn't see women doing it. And I thought that I wasn't going to be the woman that was suddenly going to, charge in and start doing it myself. So when the job listing came up and I saw that TSN was hiring, I thought, well, I have to apply, because what harm could it possibly do? And I did apply. And it was quite funny, because my boss, actually, my future boss, told me that he almost scrapped my resume because they thought that I was American, because they saw that I was working for USA Today, had gone to Syracuse, and it was only because he looked far enough down to see Wilfrid Laurier that he was like, oh, so she must be Canadian. And then that ended up getting my resume on the right pile. But it could have been very different if he didn't look closely. So I actually was in my hotel room in St. Louis while covering that series, or the playoffs that year, when I did the first interview and the second. Actually, both interviews, I was in St. Louis for those, covering hockey. And I knew it would be a good fit. I knew the job is what I wanted. They were looking for something a little bit different from the normal beat reporter, sort of not shtick, but they just wanted someone who was going to come in and see the beat differently than it had been before. And so finally they said, we got to get you up here. They flew me up to Toronto from Chicago, just literally for like a 3-hour interview. And then I was back to Chicago because I had to work later that night. So I came up to Toronto and interviewed, and we were all, I think, really on the same page in terms of how we saw the job. And I was very hopeful. And when they called to say that I had gotten the job, it was, I would say one of like the very highlights of my life. It was an incredible opportunity, but it was also a true dream come true. If I could have said, this is what my dream job would be when I was 7 years old, suddenly 20 years later, I had that job. So it was a huge responsibility. I felt like taking on this beat, because fans are so passionate and they care so much and they have such high expectations for the reporters who cover this team. And I do consider it a real privilege to, in my opinion, cover the best market in hockey, because you will not find a more intense, like passionate, infuriated, just every adjective you can think of, that's Toronto. And so it's everything that I could have hoped for. And I'll always remember one of my boss is telling me, I could have hired, just some guy who'd been covering the Leafs forever. We could have hired just anybody, but no one was going to work as hard as you. And I knew that just from meeting you. And that's always been my calling card in this role, is that I may not be the best writer, I may not be the best interviewer, but no one will ever work harder than I do. And that's what has served me well throughout the entire decade that it took me to get here.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, just to rewind a little bit, hopefully the Montreal fans don't really hear, or they don't want to hear that you're working in, with the best fans in all of hockey, because they might have a little bit of a counter argument. But
sure,
yeah, we do have a couple more minutes. I just want to ask two more questions, Kristen, if that is okay.
Yeah.
And so obviously, I want to go into more of the in-depth portion here in terms of being a woman in professional sports. And really, you're in a locker room with predominantly men, including men reporters. And now you're heading in there, and especially you, and again, you've been doing this for a while, but now this is big time for you, and you're doing it for the Leafs. You're going up to guys like Austin Matthews, John Tavares, Mitch Marner, the list goes on, and you're in there. And how do you feel, but what is the vibe around there where, again, there's a woman, we have to, be careful?
Honestly, I've never, certainly on the Leafs beat, I've never felt like I was being treated any differently or looked upon differently. Or I think that the players, because it's a different era, it's a different age. It's definitely, it's a young locker room. It's young guys in there. And I think that for them, seeing a woman or having, women reporters is not something that it is so foreign to them, because coming up through the ranks, they've seen more women. They've been around that a little bit more, and we're of that age, and they're of that sort of internet age where there's women in all kinds of capacities. So I have been very certainly that hasn't always been my experience everywhere, but with the Leafs, absolutely. I wish there were more women. I wish, that's always my hope, is that there'll be more women reporters, and that the feeling that I've always gotten is that I am as accepted as anyone else. I've never certainly encountered any player who has made me feel like he's not taking me seriously, or he's not giving me his full respect or his full attention when I'm asking him questions. So that's been very good. I know that's not the experience that every woman has, but it has been my experience here. Mm-hmm. And you also just have to carry yourself with that, with that sort of swagger, and just know I belong here. I am supposed to be here. And I think players and executives and everyone else, I think they feed off of that too. If you're confident in what you're doing, then people are going to, I think, treat you in the way that, they're going to give you that respect back. And they're going to, maybe at first they might not know who you are, or they might be confused about, what your role is, or what have you, if they're not familiar with you right off the bat. But my experience has certainly been very positive, just in my everyday dealings with the team.
Yeah, really, really amazing stuff. And one last question here, I do want to ask you, going back to what you were talking about in terms of your mental health and how work is not the only thing in your life. Mm-hmm. Obviously, we are in the midst of a pandemic. Obviously, I'd love to ask you more about that, but we don't have enough time for that. But with those that are pursuing their careers right now in journalism, wanting to be an aspiring athlete, etc., especially in this field, because right now we are dealing with no sports. That includes both yourself and myself as well. What would be your advice to those that are really down in the dumps right now, saying that we'll never get to where we want to get to? And even some of those, and it's really a hard thing to even to utter out of my mouth, but there have been people that have had suicidal thoughts because they simply do not have the facilities or the technology or the funds to be able to practice play-by-play or beat reporting or potentially even putting on the skates or picking up a hockey stick. What are your thoughts on that and your advice?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a tough time. It's tough for everyone in some ways, big and small. And I think that the best thing that you can do, I mean, is you have to protect your mental health and there's a certain amount of self-preservation that kind of has to be at the top of the list. And I have heard from a number of young people, whether it's a DM, whether it's a message, an email, people asking for that similar advice, just saying, everything feels sort of hopeless right now. Like just from a professional perspective, it feels like, actual, like people who have been doing this for years are being let go. They're being furloughed. Jobs are drying up. Like, what are we going to do? And the best thing I can tell you is that sometimes you have to make the best of a bad situation. And that can just be find something that you love writing about, whether that's hockey, whether it's basketball, whatever it is, and just find a platform where you can do it. Even if you're not being paid to do it, just find a platform where you can do it. And that actually can really be helpful from the mental health side, because just doing the thing that you love can be a real release and a real boost. And there's tons of places online and I know because people send me their work. People will send me links to their blog posts, or, hey, I wrote this article for this website. I'm so curious to see what you think. Give yourself that hope of just doing the thing that you love, even if right now you can't be compensated for it. Just keep doing it, keep building your resume, keep building your ability and your skill set and hone it. I mean, Peter King, I'll always remember when he was talking about his advice, he always says, if you're a writer, write every day. Write every day. It doesn't have to be the best thing that you've ever done, but just write and keep that mental focus on what you have to offer, your little spark, your little bit of magic. Keep the focus on that instead of focusing on what you can't control. And and I know that it's not going to be something sustainable, especially from a financial perspective. Obviously, we're all waiting to see what happens with COVID and where we go from here with our jobs, but you can't control that. And so stressing about it and worrying about it, it's inevitable, but it's not actually going to help you get where you want to go. So keep pursuing what makes you happy. And I talk to several classrooms of students a year, and I say the same things at the best of times, which is that we could not be in a pandemic and you might still be struggling to find the right job for you. But I find that, like I said, the harder I work, the luckier I get. And so keep doing you, keep focusing on what you can control, write every day, reach out to people, write something that you love and send a link to somebody you admire. And I bet you that they will write you back and they will say, hey, you know what? I really thought this was cool. Maybe you could try this, or here's a piece of advice, or whatever it is. Just don't let this be the reason that you give up, because this will end at some point. In some way, we will get back to a new normal. And when that happens, don't look back on this time and say, I really just, I lost faith in myself. Don't lose faith in yourself, because even at the best of times, you need to remember that you are your best advocate and you best, and what you can't control, let that go and just focus on what's there in front of you. And I hope that if that is feasible, that it will help to give people that little bit of hope that maybe they're lacking right now.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And really, Kristen, you are actually one, because you actually helped me by responding to me and coming on to this to this interview series. And really, I, along with our viewers, cannot thank you enough for joining me here this Wednesday evening here on Streamyard in the Primetime Rundown interview series.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad that I could come on, and hopefully someone can take a little bit of something from this. And I want to see lots more young people in sports journalism. So I hope that we can maybe help make that happen.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And for those that are avid watchers of our interview series, Fox Sports Arizona's Matt McConnell will be joining us here next Thursday as episode number 37 commences, Thursday, October 1st, starting at 5 Eastern time right here on the Eastern Observer. For Kristen Shilton, I'm Joey Jarzynka. For all of us at the Blackjack Media Group,